everybody, and welcome to Key Culture Podcast. This is Matei Gheorghiu, your host, and our co-host
Niilo Tarnanen.
Niilo Tarnanen.
Hi everybody.
Hi Niilo, and today we have two freelance musicians with us. We have IIDA Antola. Hello IIDA.
Hello, hi everybody. Nice to be here.
Nice to have you. And KANERVA MANNERMAA.
Hi, nice to be here. Greetings from Kokkola.
So
Nice to chat with you.
Nice to chat with you. So IIDA is a singer and a freelance singer, and KANERVA is a freelance violinist, and they're both Finnish. KANERVA lives in Finland, but IIDA lives in France, where she's more active nowadays. And if you want to find more about them, you can check our video description with links about the musicians. Now, as a small intro for whoever doesn't know this and doesn't understand what's the difference between a freelance musician and any other kind of classical performer, freelance musician is simply a musician who does not have like a full-time job that comes with a paid salary. So a freelance musician is someone who does gigs here and there, can play in orchestras, can do teaching, can do like chamber music, and there are advantages and disadvantages to this let's say career as a musician. One advantage would be that of course you can make your own schedule and you can accept whatever gigs you want to do or not. And as a paid musician, you have to just do the job you're told, and you are employed by somebody, so you have to just do what is required there. But of course, the disadvantage as a freelance musician is that you can remain on the side if there is not enough gigs for you. Whereas as a orchestral musician, for example, you will get a paid salary even if there are no concerts. So we wanted to bring freelance musicians to this podcast as well, because since the pandemic has hit hard on our field, the freelance musicians are probably the most affected by this. Now we will find out more about that from our two guests. But well, since the pandemic hit so hard, maybe it's good to know how we can help them and what would they want to happen for future, and how was their life before and how is it now, and how are the hopes for future. So let's start with that. I will ask the first question to both of you, IIDA and KANERVA. You're both freelance musicians. How was your professional life before the COVID pandemic started? How about IIDA?
Well, I have to say, like, for the past few years, I've been sort of half studying and half working. So I've done a semester here and there. I studied in Berlin at the UDK. So whenever I've then had a gig, like a role at the Finnish National Opera, where I've had some solo parts now for the past 3 years, then I've had to take a semester off and all that. The school has been very supportive of that earlier, but just before the pandemic, they actually kicked me out of the opera program because my career was advancing and I had actually gotten a really interesting offer for the summer from a very important festival. So I finished my studies before the pandemic because I couldn't do the role in the production at UDK. Then this pandemic happened. So none of the things that I had in mind happened.
So let me just ask you, so you mean that you had this problem with the school before the pandemic started? It had nothing to do with the pandemic?
Yes, indeed.
All right.
Well, anyway, sounds like a really hard thing. I think it sucks that it happened that way.
Yeah, but I mean, in a way, then when the pandemic started, I was like, well, none of this really matters you know, I don't know.
So this was your professional life before the pandemic started. Let's ask the same question from KANERVA.
Yes, so for the past 5 years or so, up until a year ago, I've been working nonstop on contracts in various orchestras around Finland. It started in St. Michael Strings, and I ended up in Lappeenranta City Orchestra as a concertmaster. I was working there for the year 2018 to 19. And after that, a year ago, I decided that I want to take a year off orchestra, of like a full-time contract. And I want to focus more on my own playing and also being able to do auditions with more time and more time to prepare for the auditions.
When you mean you said you had a contract, you mean that you had like a small contract. You didn't have a full time
Yes.
for life, yeah?
No, just for half a year or a year. Those
Right.
were the contracts basically. And then a year ago, I decided not to take a contract. I refused many, and people thought I was crazy, but in the end, it worked very well in my favor because I started to do better in auditions as opposed to always doing auditions like before with so little time to prepare and being working all the time nonstop, either on the contract or like doing extra gigs and stuff. So last fall, I was doing only gigs in various orchestras. Mainly, I ended up in Helsinki Phil, maybe 60 or 70% of the time, and also in Ostrobotnian Chamber Orchestra and so on. So I had last year, before the pandemic started, I had a lot of gigs, more than I could do. And also Helsinki Phil was like my main employer, and that was up until the pandemic started.
Right.
Yeah, so maybe it is a good follow-up question to this, so that how did the beginning of the pandemic affect then? I'm asking first from KANERVA, what percentage of gigs did you lost, or what percentage of gigs are you still losing compared to what it was 1 year ago?
I lost 100% of the gigs for half a year, basically, 100%. And also the thing is that right now, Helsinki Philharmonic and other big orchestras, they have to play with a smaller, reduced ensemble. So they can't use any substitutes or any gig people. So basically, my main employee of last year is not employing at all, like this year. But I have been getting a lot of gigs elsewhere, and so far I have, I think, 1 week off this fall left, like 1 week off. So I'm very employed, and I'm very happy about that. And there was already one cancellation of 1 week, but that was only 1 week, and I got another gig for that week. So the situation has been getting more back to normal, but not in the same places where I was like last year before the pandemic started. But for 6 months it was, sorry, yeah. So for 6 months it was nothing.
Okay.
No gigs at all. Yeah.
That's really tough situation. But now it seems that in the autumn that we're now beginning, you have had some fortune in the middle of a misfortune.
Yes, absolutely, and I'm very lucky to be so employed.
Yeah.
Can I ask
okay.
as a follow-up question to that, just like you said, you lost 100% of your gigs. How did you survive during that time?
Well, I got some apuraha, some scholarships
Grant.
from around, like some scholarships, and also I do get some unemployment, what's the word? Tuki.
Yes, like some employment help.
Benefits.
Yeah, exactly for from Kassa
So
of the Musicians Union.
Did you get the Corona grant from Taike or whatever it was?
No, I got a smaller Corona grant from the Musicians Union.
Okay, the Musicians Union.
Yeah.
Well,
yeah.
We should tell our listeners that in Finland, luckily there have been some possibilities during this time. A couple of foundations and, as you said, the Musicians Unions have given out some small sums of money so that I guess mostly freelance musicians can compensate for the losses they've had, which I guess it's not what happened everywhere else in the world, but maybe it's good for people to know that that's one way to solve some of the problems. Niilo.
Yes, maybe to continue that, and that basically in Finland, employees should be insured for the case of unemployment, but unfortunately, not everybody fits to the system. So if you have like many employees in many places, and you don't necessarily have kind of, if you don't have enough of the job or long enough contracts of jobs, you might not be kind of eligible for the higher unemployment coverage. So many freelancers might be in a very fragile situation here. But okay, it was nice to hear that for Kanerva you got at least something. How for IIDA? How did the pandemic affect to your life and the percentage of the gigs?
Well, as I told you before, when I got kicked out of my school in Berlin, I had to very quickly actually make the decision about moving to France, where my husband works. And I just managed to finish my move like a week before the lockdown started, the confinement period started in France. And you can imagine that already when I arrived here in March, I was like, okay, what's my next move? I might have to connect with people I know from here before. Like, what am I going to do now? Lockdown started, of course, I was not able to do anything. I know that some people have got grants. For example, in Berlin, they suddenly they had this big fund. People could apply for like 5,000 euro grants, like artists. So they were really well taken care of. But of course, I didn't live there anymore, so I couldn't apply for that. Living in France, not having any connections here, I couldn't, apply for anything from here. And also I feel when I applied for some grants from Finland, then perhaps they were looking at, okay, this applicant lives abroad, like why should we help her? But I did then eventually get one grant from Taike about the gigs that I had lost. I mean, there were a couple of concerts during the spring. But the thing about being an opera singer is also that your engagements come like a couple of years in advance. So I know, for example, now what I'm doing in 2 years, better than what is happening right at this minute. And for this season, for example, at the FNO, they had engaged me in 2 productions, like in 2 main roles. And now, like one of them, this Saariaho opera, has been moved to the future because they couldn't have the premiere in the Aix-en-Provence festival in the summer. So that's of course a huge amount of money for me to be lost this year. And I am hoping that I get to do my Le Nozze di Figaro, which we should start rehearsing in November. So.
Yeah, I'm really sorry to hear about the delay of the Saariaho opera, both from the perspective of one who would have been really enthusiastic to hear and see the new opera, but also from the point of view of all the musicians who now lost their jobs for a while, and it's delayed to the future.
Yeah.
Does
For
anyone
me, sorry, I'm just
Yeah.
for me also it was
just go ahead, yeah.
If
it was a personal loss for me, like musically, because these people also work in France, and I was looking forward to connecting with these people, like the conductors and all that. So it was not only the money part. Like I don't really care that much about money. Like when I have enough and I survive, I'm happy. But it was more the personal aspect of like advancing my career and doing these interesting productions. Yeah.
Sure. It's perfectly understandable. But with that, I would ask the next question, which is, you said how it has been, how it has affected now. Can I ask you about the recent future? Like, what does the recent future looks for you? Let's say within the next year or within the next 2 years. How about IIDA?
Well, actually, it's interesting because I went to visit my agent in August in Vienna, and she told me, like, IIDA, there are no auditions. Like, I don't know what to tell you. Like, basically, this is the worst time to try and start a career in Europe. But I did an audition last week in Berlin, and I think it worked. Like, I actually got an offer for, like, well, nothing's written in the stone yet, so I'm not going to announce where or what, but like some pretty good stuff might be happening in the next 2 years. So that, of course, that was more like a lucky strike. And I think as a freelance singer, that's basically what this is. Like, you keep working really hard all the time. When you get the opportunities to audition for somebody, you just hope that they recognize your talent and they give you work. So I might have experienced some luck last week in my audition.
But of course, there is no way of knowing for sure. Like, but would you say, like, because I know that freelance, like singers, are usually freelance nowadays. I would say most opera singers are freelance. There's very few places where that employ you for life. So I guess for an opera singer, you would expect to have a freelance career no matter what. Whereas, for example, KANERVA has probably a bit easier time in finding a job in teaching or in, let's say, playing an orchestra. But would you say that this period is very different from any other period that a singer, because there can come difficult times anyway when nobody's interested in you and you're not getting gigs anyway? Would you say that this is much worse than a normal bad period or not?
Well, I would say yes, because first of all, you need to travel a lot to auditions, and now it's really unpredictable to know if you're even able to go. Say I had booked this trip to Berlin, and then 2 days before, like, I had been checking that, do I need to do the corona test? Do I need to do the corona test? Like, no, I don't. I'm not from a risk area. And then suddenly my area was added to the risk list right before I left. And I was like, oh, great. So I have to quarantine. So it is really unpredictable. It feels like you can't really plan your life. You can't even plan your travels. Like, couple of days before, I'm not gonna book my travels to Finland until I know that, okay, I can travel, or like how much time I need for the quarantine and all that. And I think because even normally it is difficult to get auditions, especially as a young soprano, because there are lots and very good ones. And at the moment, it really is true that since the theaters have had to cancel so many performances, they're not interested in hearing new people. So this is a very difficult time for young singers to try and get their foot like between the door. It's insane. So that's why if I had, like, when I got the offer last week from an audition I thought that, okay, this is just unheard of, you know, that I might be able to have a start for my international career during the pandemic. Like this.
Well,
Yeah.
let's hope that works out very well for you.
Let's
I
hope so.
How about KANERVA? How's your recent future looking like for 1 year or 2 years, something like that?
Well, of course, like also in our field, all of the auditions were cancelled from the spring, and they also are cancelling most of the auditions from the autumn. And I don't know when the auditions are going to get rolling like normally, because of course, I mean, my goal is to get a permanent job in an orchestra. So well, in March, I did get an offer for a contract for this year from one orchestra, but I refused it because I thought that now in the fall there are going to be multiple auditions, which are going to get like rescheduled from the spring. But I think there are maybe 3 or something in Finland in total now.
Which is a lot, or is it a lot or very few?
Very few for violin. Very few, and
how many would have been like otherwise, more or less?
Well, if you count the ones that were going to get rescheduled from the spring, I think maybe 10 or something, even more might have been.
So it's a big difference.
It's a big difference, yeah. And basically almost all of the big orchestras are rescheduling their auditions until further notice. Who knows when they are going to be.
Yes, and until further notice means that maybe the audition will be open in 1 month or 2 or 3 or 1 year and so on. Until then you have to find something to eat, however you can.
Yes, exactly. So if I would have known back in March that the audition situation is going to be like this, I probably would have taken the offer for contract. But luckily I do have, well, like I said before, the whole autumn is basically almost booked for me already. I'm doing a lot of gigs in other orchestras from like the big orchestras of Helsinki area. And for the spring, I don't know. No, I don't know at all. I have a soloist gig in Berlin around New Year's, which is very unstable. Like you can't know if that's going to happen at all, and I don't really know if I should. Well, of course I have to prepare for it, but who knows? Maybe it will be postponed for 1 year or something. And spring, I don't know. Best case scenario, I probably would win one of the few auditions that are going to happen this fall. I'm going to for sure go to them and see what happens. And best case scenario, I win one and start working in January. But otherwise, I have no idea. Like, everything is very open. And also, as Ida said, the travel restrictions are a big problem because there are more auditions, I think, in Europe going on for violin, or at least there are in Scandinavia, there are a few happening. But for example, in the end of August, I had to cancel one audition because the travel restrictions were getting worse that week when the audition was going to happen. So
Did you lose money for the tickets?
I postponed the tickets until November. It was to Copenhagen, and there is going to be another audition in Denmark in November. So I postponed the tickets. So I didn't lose money yet, but who knows? Maybe the travel restrictions will be so horrible in November as well. So I can't travel. Who knows?
Yeah.
Who knows?
Yes. So kind of you were describing that your best case scenario would be that you win some audition in the becoming months. How about the worst case scenario, or do you even want to think of it?
Well, I don't know. I mean, I was already thinking about it like this summer when I heard that Helsinki Phil is not going to hire any substitutes or gig persons, and so I was imagining like having maybe 1 or 2 gigs the whole fall, and I think that could be the worst case scenario also for the next spring, autumn, 2 years. Who knows how long this will last for? And I mean, the worst, of course, would be that all of the orchestras will be shut down because of the restrictions on concerts. That can also happen. If they restrict the amount of people in one room for 10 people or something, then nobody can work.
I have a follow-up question for both of you about the worst case scenario. Considering you live in Finland, Kanerva, and you live in France, IIDA, but you're also Finnish. So how long could you still last, let's say, with what you have now, assuming there will be like 1 gig every once in a while, how long can a musician like you can last without working in their field before they have to, I don't know, find another job? What would you say? Let's say Kanerva, because you were speaking previously.
I have no idea. I think probably in a year at least, I mean, you would have to find another job or something, because also it's not only about the money, but it's about playing with people. This summer when we couldn't work and we couldn't play with people, I started these chamber music jam sessions in my house with friends, and the first time we actually got to play together, like in June, it was amazing. Just like you realize what you've been missing, and it's not about the money, it's about the playing with people. Like you miss your profession so much when you can't do it, that I don't know how long I can last without doing something like with a purpose also.
Yeah, and I said in a previous episode with Niilo the same, that for me it was very, very hard. I had the whole summer empty to compose, and I just almost couldn't compose anything because I was thinking, this got cancelled, this got cancelled, this got cancelled, this premiere might happen, might not happen, I have no idea, but you should write it anyway because in 2 years maybe it will happen, or it might not happen. Go ahead, Kanerva.
Yeah, exactly. I had the same feeling, and it's very hard to motivate yourself.
Absolutely.
When you know that you might have 1 gig in half a year. It's very hard to motivate yourself to, I mean, you have all the time in the world to practice for once, but then you have no purpose for it. You have just the purpose of developing yourself, which is a big purpose, but it's
Sure.
very hard to motivate yourself without like any plans for the future.
How about IIDA now? Let's say you don't get the gig in Berlin. Your Sariaho keeps getting postponed. Your Noche, how is it? Now I forgot how it's in English. La Noche del Figaro. Let's say that doesn't happen either. How much could you last like hoping for future gigs until you decide, okay, I have to work in a shop, or I have to, I don't know, become a secretary, or I have to whatever, like something else?
Well, luckily now financially, because I'm married and my husband is working, we're okay. And I'm living on my savings. Of course, I hope that we could buy a house. Let's see about that. Maybe that doesn't happen anytime soon. I've given myself anyway like a little timeline that, okay, if the singing thing is not working out by the time that I'm 35, maybe I will do something else and not only, live from hand to mouth. Yeah, I've been considering my options, and that maybe I would like to study something else.
Since you said that you've given yourself the option until you're 35, maybe you tell us how much you are now, so that we know you have 8 years or 2 years or.
I'm 30.
Okay,
30,
so you have given yourself 5 years. Okay.
Yes. Yeah. And I don't know, like, I think during this pandemic, actually, it's been refreshing to think about the other options. Like, well, for me, practicing was the only thing that kept me going during the lockdown. I don't know if you know, but in France, like in March, we went to like full confinement. Everybody had to be at their house. You had to fill out a paper every time you went outside. You were only allowed to leave your house once a day. Only go if
To
you
throw
went
the
shopping,
garbage.
only if you went outside. You were only allowed 1 kilometer radius outside your house. All the parks were closed. Like literally easy to lose your mind. Of course, if you're working further than 1 kilometer away, then you were allowed to go to work. But there were also people patrolling on the streets and checking you were obeying the rules, and it felt really freaky. The second month of confinement, then the radius was 100 kilometers. So we took 1 week off. We went to a friend's summer cabin close by. So for me, practicing was really the thing that kept me going, because otherwise, like, I don't think I would have survived. What was the question again?
What is the worst case scenario? But you have told us that you are still giving yourself some time until you can succeed in music, around 5 years. But the worst case scenario would be, in your case, that you don't get any gigs for the next 5 years, and you still have money from your savings, and your husband is working. So at least you're not going to work washing toilets anytime soon. Yeah. So.
Okay. I can say I can totally relate to what IIDA was describing about that the rehearsing was what kept you going on during the most horrific weeks. For me, when I only found time from the remote teaching and the family, I have 2 kids, so I took even short moments to compose something, and that kind of started giving me new energy and kind of hope that yes, something will happen even after this. But okay, from that I think we have a good bridge to asking why are we doing this? Why is classical music so important to us? Why is it important? Maybe I ask KANERVA first.
Well, it's a hard question because it's so like personal, what music brings to yourself, like to each person. But I myself, I can't live without playing. That's just the thing. Like when a couple of years ago, I had an injury on my shoulder, and I had to take the summer off playing completely. And at first it was so liberating, like you have all the time in the world, like you don't have to practice. And it was so liberating for maybe 2 weeks or something. But then like gradually it started going into your head somehow. I had nowhere to put my feelings into the way that I put my feelings into my violin. And in 2 months, I was missing playing so much. And I thought I was going kind of like crazy mentally because I had nowhere to put the feelings into. And I think it's just the feeling you can get in a concert. It's something, or in an opera or in a ballet, it's something that can't be replaced with anything. and it can't be replaced with watching it online. Like nothing beats live. I don't know, but it's very personal to everyone, and it has been also, classical music has been around for so long, and I think it's not gonna go anywhere either.
How about IIDA?
Well, on a personal level, of course, being able to create is something very important to me. But on a not selfish level, I think classical music is important for the society, and kind of like museums or libraries, or you need culture because you need to educate people about the history of humanity in a way. I feel in paintings or in music, you can see the different phases of European culture, and that is something everybody should know about, even if it's not recent. Like sometimes I'm even a little bit annoyed when I go to operas and they try to put these stories in a current context, which doesn't always work, and it doesn't, but the same emotions that these people had in the past are still relevant. Like the emotions are relevant and they don't change. So yeah, I think that's the reason why I'm a big fan of classical music and why I consume it a lot.
I think this is really interesting what you said about the kind of cultural history, and it, even before you mentioned it, it brought opera into my mind, because in opera you have also the words and not only what you sing, but kind of the characters and all the theatrical side of it, and it kind of brings elements there that often refer to really many places at time, and probably in geography, and there are so many cultural layers that it's really intriguing because of this. Do you want to continue about that, or?
Well, I think that's also the reason why sometimes people find opera very hard to access, because they don't understand, like Le Nozze di Figaro, they don't understand where in history it is situated, what was the culture, what was appropriate for men or women to do, and what did it mean if you were higher class or lower class, and how did these people interact? And if you don't understand all those aspects, the opera is not very interesting.
On the other hand, I think maybe it's about the mindset. Like, do you need to know it in beforehand, or could it be something that you think, why do these people act like this? Maybe there's something behind, and after that you got interested and start looking around what it
you're,
could be.
You're getting very romantic now, Niilo. Like
really?
Yes, that people get intrigued by how men and women behaved in the 17th century, and then they start reading about it, for example.
Well, we have many definitions of what is romantic. Okay. Yep.
I guess I could ask the next question.
Go ahead.
And that would be, well, do you think we could get back to normal? By normal, I mean like how it was before the pandemic started in our field as a whole. And what is your opinion of online concerts? Do you think people want them? Do you think they're a good substitute for concerts? Do you think they're bad? What do you think about this? Let's start with KANERVA.
Well, I hope that someday we will get more back to normal, but I think it will take a lot of time. And until we have some good testing about like how the virus spreads in concert halls, for example, I think it will be very hard for the governments to let us have like full audiences and stuff. So I think they are they have to be very careful, and that's understandable, but it will also probably bankrupt some orchestras, smaller orchestras, for example, and smaller art installations and institutions and stuff. So I hope that it will not be for very long, because the amount of money also lost in the ticket sales, it's quite huge for especially the smaller institutions. And I think online concerts have their place for sure, but I think it's kind of, for me personally, it doesn't quite have the same feeling as, for example, if you're in the same room with the audience. Like when you're in the same room with the audience, you're breathing the same air filled with virus, of course, but like it's not quite the same in the online concerts, and the feeling can't be quite transferred via the internet. And I think also a very important point is the ticket sales of the online concerts, because now during the pandemic there became a lot of stuff for free in the internet, and I mean, we can't work for free entirely. So if we have to refer to online concerts, we also have to get some kind of compensation for that.
Yes, and in the same time, if you're going to ask people to pay for online concerts that can already be found on YouTube, then why pay for them at all?
Exactly, exactly.
Niilo had raised his hand, so.
Yeah, I have a follow-up. Yeah, but it's really good that you point out the question of for what do you pay and what not, so that we would actually really need to create new kind of new ways in how people really pay for what they're listening online, and not always just for free. Let's see how it goes. But my actual follow-up question was about the repertoire, because you were referring that the orchestras quite often use now limited smaller ensembles because of the safety measures. So what do you think? Will this affect the repertoire in a longer term? I mean that now people maybe hear even new pieces that haven't been part of the standard repertoire because of the kind of forced limitations of the size of the orchestra. But do you think that some of these small orchestra pieces might, become new hits that become part of the standard repertoire later on? KANERVA.
Yes, absolutely, absolutely. And also the amount of chamber music played also in orchestras, I think it's very good, because I mean, orchestra for me, an orchestra is just a big chamber music ensemble at its best. And I think when we play in smaller ensembles, also like formed from the orchestra members, it brings out more like a chamber music vibe also when we get to play in the bigger ensembles. And I think, and also adding more repertoire, be it chamber music or smaller orchestra pieces, I mean, I think it's very important. And I think also, like this week I'm playing in Ostrobotnian Chamber Orchestra, and there's one Ligeti piece played this week, which they haven't played before, which is very interesting because it's perfect for their ensemble. But they haven't played it before, and there is not that much of repertoire for a string orchestra, which is basically what Ostrobotnian Chamber Orchestra is. So I think even like that's a very good example of how like these restrictions bring new repertoire also to the orchestras which play in a smaller ensemble.
But let me specify that probably there is a bad side to this, which is that everybody will play Mozart and Haydn forever and ever, because it's just like with the right kind of ensemble that almost any orchestra in the world has. So everybody will be like spoon-fed only Mozart and Haydn for like a long time. Am I wrong, or is that true?
That might also be true. Yeah, there will be a lot of that happening also. Yeah, and even that one gig that was cancelled from this fall, it was a Beethoven symphony in Lapland Chamber Orchestra, and they will not arrange even that because it's too big for the restrictions at the moment. Not even Beethoven. So imagine all the amount of like Mahler and
for a Mahler,
yeah, exactly.
Yes.
I have no idea when we will be able to play Mahler symphonies again, and big also pieces requiring choirs and this kind of stuff. And there are some reductions from Mahler symphonies, for example, and they are happening a lot right now, but they are not.
Yeah, but it's not the same
it's
thing.
Not the same thing.
I'm not the biggest fan of Mahler reductions.
Yeah.
Did you see what Copenhagen opened their season with? Like the radio, they did this enormous Mahler symphony with soloists and choir. It was insane. I'm like, how come you choose this as the beginning of your season? I mean, I sort of hope we don't go back to normal, because I think there are also other amazing repertoire than just Wagner, for example. Like, I still find it adorable that opera houses are trying to make their like Wagner productions happen when you could invest in contemporary music, for example. Like, for sure, there are lots of, you could employ composers, you could find new creative solutions. And I don't know, yeah, this would be the time to change things up a bit, stir the pot.
If any opera wants to employ me, I'm fine. Like,
me too.
KANERVA.
Yeah, there's actually next week we are starting an opera project by Kari Tikka, his opera, and the orchestra has been reduced significantly, and I think the strings will remain and also the percussion will remain, but other than that, all the woodwinds and the rest, they are being replaced by a keyboard. So I'm very intrigued to see how it will work.
Yeah.
I haven't even gotten the new score yet, so I'm very intrigued to see how it will work.
Let's ask the same from IIDA, because she never had the chance to say what she thinks about going back to normal, and if online concerts are good or not, or how they are.
Well, I think KANERVA mentioned already a lot of points that I also had in mind. I mean, I do not believe that videos ever replace the actual feeling being in the hall, especially like singers sound stupid when they're mic'd. Like, you have to feel the real thing in the hall, because there are these vibrations you don't get by a computer screen. I was also a bit frustrated after a while that it seemed that it was always the exact same singers in every single big opera house whose performances were broadcasted. And I was thinking, like, don't we have any more versatility in this industry? It seems like it's a very small pool of people that they choose from, and who do all the gigs and all the same roles in all of the same houses with the same directors,
for that week, I guess
that was my first thought. I don't want to go completely back to normal. I think there are some changes that we could make at this point. This could be a good place to start.
For that, we should invite you to another show to talk about the internal affairs of opera houses and why the same directors work with the same conductors and the same singers and so on. But
are you trying to get me into trouble?
but I thought that maybe you do this after 20 years when you're already huge and nobody can do anything to you anymore. So.
No, but I mean, if I just quickly say about that, I mean.
But then you might not come to our small podcast anymore, which might also be a problem.
Just saying that because, for example, in opera, agents have a lot of power. So if you're with a powerful agent, you get the right gigs. And yeah, it's a whole other topic. I can talk about that later. But I feel that there would be a larger pool of interesting performers who at the moment don't get the opportunity because of how the system has been built. And I think opera has also been quite capitalized lately. Like I don't like the way it's going into this more commercial direction. Also, like in opera, all the huge competitions, they are only looking for young singers who might be way too young for the opportunities that they get. And then at the same time, people are complaining, why aren't there any dramatic voices, like real dramatic voices in the industry? But the truth is that most of those people could not sing well in their 20s. So, you know, all of this could be changed. And I hope that when we are heading towards whatever the new normal is, that we can make some changes in the system.
Niilo.
Yeah, I think this leads to a follow-up. You were now talking about kind of that there are many forces inside of the classical music industry kind of pulling to a different sorts, like the commercial sides, and then some forces that amplify diversity, but on the other hand, some others that maybe put the diversity down and make it to more concentrate on the very same key repertoire. Then is the situation about the musicians should be young and blah blah blah. So what I would actually like to stay a moment inside of these internal struggles of the classical music life, if so to say, and ask both of you, like, what do you think? How do you see the situation? And in addition to what was already mentioned, like the online concerts and the repertoire versus the size of the ensemble, these kind of things, what other issues you see how the balances of power might be shifting in the going on years, whether it's about COVID or whether it's about something completely different? Ida, would you like to go on something about that?
Go on. Well, yeah, like other issues in classical music, really. Well, yeah, I think that at least in opera, like ageism is definitely a very big topic. And
by
like
ageism, you mean that they have to all be young and not old? Like if you're 60, you don't sing anymore. Is that what you mean?
Yeah, well, unless you're Edita Gruberova, then you can sing when you're 60. But it's sort of, they expect everybody to be very mature, very young, and that is not always the case. I know so many people who have really found their voices only at 30, and some really remarkable voices that are not perceived very well. I mean, in opera, I think there's this other problem also. For example, like in recent 20 years, probably, they have a lot more theater people coming in, doing casting instead of musicians who would, they don't have the same, how would I say it, same perspective about the voice, or they don't have any education about a voice, like what kind of voice is appropriate for singing a big role, I don't know, in a dramatic Puccini opera. So I think
KANERVA, would would you say something about the importance of the age in instrumental music and in the orchestras? Is it a big deal there as it is, or seems to be in the opera world, or is it different?
I think it's not as big a deal in our field, in the orchestras. I think it's not as important, but of course, I mean, if you're young and you're good, you probably will get picked in an audition over somebody older, maybe, I don't know. But there are cases when somebody who is 35, 40 will win an audition. And also I think actually in the
So by old you mean 35, 40, my God.
Old. Older. Older. But like after graduation, like if I don't know, I'm actually not very sure about this, but I had something in mind, but I just lost it. Sorry.
I'm sorry to have interrupted you.
No problem. I had something in mind, but
about the age of people who might get an audition or not.
Yeah. Actually, yes. In the concertmaster auditions and in the leader auditions, I think not very many young people will get even invited to concertmaster auditions. I think it's more the other way around. Like they want to give more opportunities to the people who already have some background in that.
But isn't this like a problem for many fields in our classical music scene, that commercialism is very much represented by this idea of always putting younger people into positions that are associated with an soloist or conductor, or because sometimes it feels to me that if you don't win if you want to be a soloist violinist, you have to win some important competitions by the time you're 22, 23, something, because if you win it when you're 30, nobody cares anymore. It used to be that if you wanted to be a good conductor, you had to be a good professional in something else, and then you study conducting, and then you, when you're 30, 40, you become an important conductor. Nowadays, it also seems that if you're not conducting big by the time you're 25, you're not so important anymore. And this is something that has personally bothered me a lot, because I always thought that, someone who has studied masters or doctoral studies, or has played in various orchestras, or who has had time to compose all sorts of pieces, and like those are the people who have, let's say, a bigger depth to the whole situation, so they have more chances to provide something meaningful instead of like throwing them to like the side, than someone who's very young and enthusiastic but who doesn't have that that experience yet, or the depth, no matter how talented they are. And I think this is pretty much a matter of the commercial aspect.
I think it's about this culture of producing prodigies instead of finding them, because I think prodigy is like it's a rare phenomenon, and now it seems that everybody should be a prodigy.
Exactly.
I think many people are talented, and for some people it takes a longer time to develop that talent, and it can still be remarkable even if you're older. But yeah, unfortunately, I feel this too very much.
Maybe with this we get to the next question, which would be, it's very much connected to the struggles of classical music in general. So if you, KANERVA and IIDA, would be in positions of power, whatever they might be, orchestra managers, festival directors, conductors of big orchestras, or you would be even a politician who has the power to give finance to art, more or less, what would be the kind of things you would want to change or implement that would make, let's say, our field better? Let's start with IIDA.
Yay! Well, if I was a politician, I would make sure that schools have access to culture, as simply as that. I can't believe it that it seems, at least in Finland, how I've been following it, it seems to be less and less culture, or even they're talking about like not teaching music at school anymore. And even when I was like in school, I remember we did a lot of pop music. Like I was the odd one out to be taking piano lessons and all that. So I think experiences like going to the opera with the school were really big and world expanding experiences. So, you know, if culture is funded by the government, then we should also make it available for the people. But I think it's not only the big institutions that need the funding. I also think it's the smaller organizations and like these grassroots organizations. Like I think in Finland, there's not so much diversity in the opera field, for example, because people have hard time even getting funding to be able to organize opera productions. And look, there's only one national opera house in Finland, whereas in other countries, there are at least several opera companies.
So if there would be like 3 opera houses in Finland, this big one and let's say 2 smaller ones, then it would be like much better in your opinion for making smaller productions and let's say more contemporary or whatever other kind of projects that don't end up.
Yeah, and don't get me wrong, there are already like in Tampere and in Joensuu and in Turku, but they pretty much make like one production a year or something. So if they could have several, that would already be a big step forward, and it will also employ more singers, I would guess. Yeah, and then, well, this mainly the education thing I think is really important, something that we should consider. Yeah.
Right. How about KANERVA?
Yeah, absolutely. I agree with the education thing. I think that's very important. And also, recently there have been a lot of news about shutting down orchestras or cutting funding from orchestras in the smaller cities in Finland. And for example, Kemi City Orchestra was very close to getting shut down completely. And having worked there myself, I thought that was devastating news for the region, because in that region the concerts of the orchestra are almost always sold out. And in the whole region of Lapland there are 2 orchestras, Lapland Chamber Orchestra and Kemi City Orchestras, who cover the whole region, which is huge compared to other places in Finland. And I've been also working in places where the concerts are not even close to filled. Like the audience is just not there. But in Kemi specifically, the audience and the people love the orchestra and love the quartet that's working there. And if I were a politician, I would study more, like how are the concerts filled in that area? Like, is there a need for the orchestra in that area? Also theater, because they wanted to shut down it for the savings of 250,000 euros a year. But when those were not the actual savings that were going to be made from shutting down the orchestra, after you take out the government funding, it would have been 50,000 euros a year of savings for the whole orchestra for working for 1 year, which is, I think, nothing compared to many other things. And I would actually, I want the politicians to start investigating, like, is the orchestra needed there? Is culture needed there in that area? Is it loved? Is it appreciated? Because it's not so in all of the places, but in particular there it was very appreciated.
I would also add up to that well, maybe we should just let our audience know that Finland so far is the country with the largest amount of orchestras per capita, I
Yeah.
think, and it's somewhat strange as you were talking about Kemi. I lived 2 years in Kokkola, and Kokkola is a city of what 50,000 people, and the orchestra there was very good, and the audience was always filling up the place, and people seem to have enjoyed very much going to the concerts. And I don't know if that happens everywhere in the world, that you get like for 30, 40, 50,000 people, cities, orchestras who can deliver like properly. Kanerva.
Yeah, is like exactly. I'm right now in Kokkola working in that orchestra, and I think it's quite remarkable that, for example, a flutist friend of mine who's Australian and lives in Germany at the moment. He's never been to Finland, but he knew this orchestra, this Ostrobothnian Chamber Orchestra, and was like, "Oh, they are very good." He sent to me when I was first week here, and I think it's very remarkable that also in Kemi there are 20,000 people live in that city, and the concerts are always filled. The hall takes up to 500 people, and they are always filled. And also here in Kokkola, but it's not like that in every city, also in Finland, and it's not like that everywhere in the world, for sure.
And as continuing on the line I was going and connecting it to what Ida said about the education. Yes, I think that's a very good point, that if you're going to have education that provides people with opportunities to go to concerts, to go to operas, or learn even in school about the classical music, that provides, let's say, audience for the future. And one question I asked once someone who knows much more about politics than I do was, why is it always that when there's some financial problems, the first thing you cut is theaters, orchestras, museums? And the answer he gave me was like, well, they're a very small part of the electorate. If you're going to cut the teacher salaries, you're going to have very many pissed people. But if you're going to cut, let's say, the musician salaries or the actor salaries, there's very little people. So they're not that important, let's say, from a political perspective. And it's probably sad, but it's in the end the reality. But let's say voting blocks like the unemployed or the elake, what is it, like the
Pension.
the people who, yes,
The retired.
retired, or for example the working class, or teachers, as I said, or IT people, or whatever. Like, they're more people than we are, and therefore it's more likely that their needs are going to be met. So that is a problem. But for example, if you do have this public behind this culture, then that public can be part of that electorate in a way. So you can probably influence the bad decisions that might be taken in the future.
Yes, I think the mentioned examples of Kemi and Kokkola, for example, are really good about what the local communities actually could be, and like, I mean, each of them is a bit different, and this gives them their own character, and this builds diversity to the ground. So I think, this is what we should support, instead of supporting, every here and there being kind of copies of the same orchestras or the same operas. At least I'm for the, that the ensembles have their own, their own tastes and their own enthusiast audiences. But this leads actually to another side of what we were talking just recently about the politics and the power. So maybe in the end, let's wrap up by talking a bit again about the money. So what would be a sustainable way of financing classical music? Do we need more state involvement, or more private entrepreneurial activity, or both, or something completely different? Kanerva, what's your opinion?
I think both. I think both. I don't think we have that much of a like private entrepreneurial involvement in many places yet, but I think we could get that more involved, and I hope that there will sometime become some politician who will speak very loudly for the arts, because it's not that common, because we are a small field in the nation. But yeah, I think both will be the way to go.
I just find it really remarkable, for example, in Germany, that since they have Angela Merkel there, she is, she's somebody who goes to Bayreuth Festival and she consumes classical music a lot. Germany supports classical music so much. It's incredible. So that makes me think that it's just a matter of distributing the money. I don't really know anything about how much money there is in a budget and how it's divided, but I imagine that anyway, it's always the values of the politicians that direct the money in different places. And I feel there would be probably room for more support for culture, just in general. And indeed, we need politicians to do the work for that. Also, I just say in France, I feel that average person consumes more culture than in Finland, for example, that I already felt in Finland at school. It was sort of not very cool to, like go into museums or, I'm from Helsinki and I lived in a kind of normal Helsinki neighborhood, but people were not necessarily as educated in that. And in France, I really feel sort of everything has something to do with the culture, the architecture, they preserve old houses, their food culture. It's like a whole another level of enjoying life. And the art, paintings, everything. You have great museums, great expos. They organize all kinds of interesting stuff. They had the Tutankhamun expedition brought to Paris. Of course, it's a bigger country as well, so maybe there's just in general there's more money, like bigger economy. So it's in a different scale than in Finland. But anyway, I think it's also a question of growing into that.
Kanerva has a point.
Yeah, and I also experienced the same in Russia. I lived in St. Petersburg when I was 12, 13 or something. And I think it's also because of the history of the country. There has been culture for so many years, so like centuries, there has been culture and they have kind of grown into that. But it's brought more to you in schools, I find. And for example, in a normal Russian school, you read poems out loud in front of the class, like in your Russian lessons. Like that's how they are brought into the culture also. And I think in this modern age, we could engage more people who are not that familiar with classical music or with opera or theaters or stuff. We could engage more by using social media more, doing more crossover things, perhaps. Like, for example, whenever an orchestra does a game music concert, it's full. It's completely full. And majority of the people have not been to a classical music concert before. And and that's their way of getting into the classical music scene. And I think that's those kinds of things, like crossover things, are the things that we should use in this modern age to get more people involved.
I would also add, since one of you spoke about the fact that we should have more young people because the state is providing finance for orchestras. Why are not children going to orchestras for free more often to the concerts? I was also thinking that this is also interesting that if the state has to pay for all these places to exist and to function, isn't it like sustainable to provide the public for these places so that it doesn't run out of people who want to go there in the first place? So I don't kind of understand the mechanism behind that. So if you think about it, the free money you could be giving for teachers who go to listen to concerts in schools, that's money you invest for future, for not having to cut or a certain musical institution or theater or museum. Yeah, I don't get that. Niilo.
Yeah, I think the motivation needs to come from the content, from the essence of whatever cultural phenomenon we are dealing with opera, with orchestras, with chamber music, and so on. So I think all of us have provided some good examples of what has been meaningful to us during this conversation. And I think if we could just kind of discuss more about these moments of meaningfulness with various people in powerful positions, and perhaps, also get them interested in having those same meaningful experiences. So I don't know, maybe that's part of the solution, but probably only one part. Does some of you want to still say something to the kind of end? I think we are running out of time quite soon.
Everybody's
well,
happy.
thank you for inviting me.
Likewise, thank you.
This has been really, really interesting.
Yeah.
Yes, it
Likewise.
And also, I was just thinking when KANERVA was also explaining about like what kind of politician she would be, I was just thinking we need more women also in the leadership positions.
Yeah.
True.
Well, with this positive note, maybe it's time to thank both IIDA Antola and KANERVA MANNERMAA for their presence in our show Key Culture, and we hope you had you got some important points across, and people got something out of this conversation. So everybody, thank you very much for tuning in, and tune in again for Key Culture podcast. Have a great time, everybody.
Thank you.
Thanks, and have a great time.
Bye-bye.